Hello and a very warm welcome to this special episode of World Panorama, a look back at 2015. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking at many of the ups and downs across the world this last year. Regions of conflict and tension, newsmakers who made a splash, to the biggest issues and much more. I'm Teena Jha. Our top story. Perhaps the dominant theme of 2015 has been the rise of terror, almost as an everyday word. And little has symbolized terror in 2015 more than the Islamic State terrorist group, its brutality and its dangerously expanding reach. In the last year or so, the Islamic State has grown beyond its original home in Syria and Iraq, extending operations into other parts of the Middle East and North Africa by establishing alliances and absorbing other groups. It has claimed responsibility for carrying out attacks across this region. Take a look at this report.
More notoriety as the face of global terror. More brutality, more mass killings, more abductions and beheadings. 2015 marks expansion of the Islamic State in all of these areas. In March this year, days after an attack in Tunisia, 4 suicide bombers detonated their explosives at 2 mosques in Sana'a in Yemen, killing at least 137 people, wounding more than 300. Later in June, a gunman opened fire on beachgoers at a resort frequented by Europeans in what is widely seen as a campaign to devastate Tunisia's tourism industry. Many of the dead and injured were from Britain. A suicide bombing in Suruç district in Turkey killed 32 people and injured 104 in July. This was possibly the first planned attack by the IS on Turkish soil. The bombing resulted in a new escalation between Turkey and the Islamic State. Turkey began carrying out bombings against the Islamic State and PKK in Syria. Later in October, a suicide bomb at a peace rally in Ankara in Turkey killed at least 100 people. More than 400 others were injured. The twin explosions ripped through a crowd of activists outside the main railway station in the Turkish capital. The Ankara bombings were the deadliest in Turkey's history. In November, assailants in twin suicide bombings targeted a southern suburb in Beirut city in Lebanon, where many loyalists of the powerful Shiite Hezbollah militia lived. Hezbollah is fighting along Syrian government forces against the Sunni-led rebellion in Syria. 43 people were killed in the attacks. The day after the Beirut attack, a bloody siege across central Paris killed at least 132 people, wounded scores more, and sharply raised the terror threat confronting Europe. Terrorists sprayed bullets on people at 8 big entertainment centers across the city. Decrying an act of war, French President François Hollande warned of a major escalation in the fight against the Islamic State. French fighter planes and cruise missiles were deployed against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
2015 also saw the biggest migrant crisis Europe has seen since the 1940s and the Second World War. Thousands of people pouring into the European mainland from North Africa, Syria and Afghanistan, braving dangerous sea voyages and treks as they look to begin life afresh. capsizes in the Mediterranean for flimsy seaboats, kills hundreds. For these migrants, as well as for the European nations, facing this massive influx, it's been trying times. Here's more on the story.
The tragic symbol of the migrant storm of 2015. This chilling photograph of a 3-year-old Syrian boy dead on a Turkish beach shocked the world in September, already grappling with images of the migrant and refugee crisis. The boy died during the crossing, along with his 5-year-old brother and his mother. They were among many who undertook a torturous journey over the high seas, using dangerous sea routes to reach Europe. Most had fled Syria's 4-year civil war. Sympathy and outrage arose at the perceived inaction of developed nations in helping thousands of refugees. Just before this, in August, 71 migrants were found dead in a truck on an Austrian highway. For months, Italian and Greek coast guards have been recovering dead bodies at sea, and anonymous corpses have washed up on Europe's shores. The migrants, mainly from war-torn Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan and poor sub-Saharan Africa, entered the European Union through Greece and Italy after crossing the Mediterranean in boats from Turkey and North Africa. United Nations Refugee Agency UNHCR said more than 3,400 people lost their lives or have been reported missing as they seek to reach Europe. Yet over 500,000 migrants and refugees have entered the EU since the start of the year, and thousands will continue to try their luck. With no solution to the conflict in sight, European leaders invited African and Middle Eastern countries to discuss the crisis at a summit in Malta on November 11th and 12th. The crisis is threatening to dismantle Europe's open internal borders agreement, and Europeans want to find a way to stem the migration flows. Germany has been the biggest magnet for the refugees. The German government estimates that 800,000 to 1 million refugees and migrants arrived in 2015, twice as many as in any prior year. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who first made it clear that the country will not close its borders to those fleeing war, is now facing a political backlash after the crisis opened a rift among the ruling coalition parties. The European Union met with Balkan leaders in October and agreed on a 17-point plan to cooperate on managing flows of migrants through the Balkan Peninsula. Among measures agreed were that 100,000 places in reception centers would be made available along the route from Greece towards Germany, half of them in Greece and half in countries to the north. The UN Refugee Agency would help establish them. The leaders also agreed that the EU border agency Frontex would step up activity on the Greek-Macedonian border to ensure people trying to cross would be registered. November 13, 2015. Like so much else, the multiple terror attacks in Paris was something of a turning point on the migrants' front too. Insecurities and fears mounted among EU nations of the migrant influx also bringing with it terror elements. Poland was among the first to shut its doors, Macedonia ready to put up a fence to bar the influx, Czechoslovakia hit out. It became an onslaught the EU Commission and others eagerly sought to dispel.
We are concerned about the reactions from some states to end these very programs that would manage the flow of people that are being put in place, backtracking from commitments made such as for relocation, or proposing the erection of more fences or barriers.
Nothing would help more the propaganda of Daesh than to see a Europe closing borders to Syrian refugees. Nothing would help more the propaganda of Daesh than to see hatred expressions in Europe against innocent Muslims that are coming to Europe together with Christians, together with Yazidis, together with all other religions, fleeing the terrorism and the persecution in Syria and in other countries.
Fences put up by Macedonia, expulsion of migrants and such measures led to clashes between migrants and police in some countries. The European Union also wants Turkey to keep the migrants from entering the EU and take back those rejected by Europe. As an incentive, it has offered Turkey the prospect of faster progress on its bid to join the EU and on visa-free travel to the EU. Whatever the outcome of the various summits, regular and emergency meetings, many will still be willing to undertake the long and perilous journey to reach safety and a better economic future. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, we'll step into a short break here. Still to come, we'll also be taking a look at some of the big disasters, natural and man-made, of 2015. There's that and much more to come on the other side. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. 2015 was also a year of landmark developments in the geopolitical arena. The signing of the landmark Iran nuclear deal, a new beginning to US-Cuba ties strained for decades, and a milestone achieved towards taking on the spectre of climate change.
US President Barack Obama and his Cuban counterpart Raul Castro shook hands at the Summit of the Americas on April 10th, a symbolically charged gesture as the pair sought to restore ties between the two Cold War foes. The next day, the two men sat side by side to hold talks, the mood cordial but businesslike. Apart from a couple of brief informal encounters, leaders of the US and Cuba have not had any significant meetings since the Castro brothers toppled US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista and then steered their Caribbean country into a close alliance with the Soviet Union. On July 20th, the Cuban flag was raised over Havana's embassy in Washington for the first time in 54 years, as the United States and Cuba formally restored relations. In Havana, a lone Cuban flag was raised outside the U.S. Embassy. The Stars and Stripes were raised at a visit by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry on August 14th. On July 14th, Iran and 6 major world powers reached a nuclear deal formally called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. The deal caps more than a decade of negotiations with an agreement that could transform the Middle East. Under the deal, sanctions imposed by the United States, European Union and United Nations against Iran would be lifted in return for Iran agreeing to long-term curbs on its nuclear program. Tehran needs to decommission over 10,000 centrifuges, ship 98% of its enriched uranium out of the country, and re-engineer a nuclear reactor so that it cannot produce weapons-grade plutonium. Iranians rejoiced at now realistic possibilities of coming closer to developed nations and a break from decades of animosity with the United States. The final round of talks involved nearly 3 weeks of intense negotiations between U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. October 18th was adoption day for the nuclear deal with Iran. Officials of the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) began the process of checks toward certification that Iran has met initial requirements under the JCPOA. Actual sanctions relief would come about from all parties after the certification process is complete. Leaders of more than 150 countries gathered at the United Nations headquarters in New York in September to officially adopt a new set of sustainable development goals. The goals are directed at combating poverty, inequality and climate change. Adoption of the goals is seen as the most comprehensive international effort ever to tackle the world's ills. The document, titled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, outlines 17 broad goals and sets 169 specific targets. The global goals are designed to provide a roadmap for countries to finance and shape government policies over the next 15 years. Targets are to be monitored and reviewed using a set of global indicators to be agreed by March 2016. Implementation is expected to cost $3.5 trillion to $5 trillion every year till 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the Global Goals, build on the Millennium Development Goals or MDGs. The new SDGs go much further than the MDGs, addressing the root cause of poverty and the universal need for development that works for all people. On December 12, 195 countries signed a historic accord to hold global temperatures to a maximum rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. The legally binding climate deal aims to stave off the worst effects of catastrophic global warming. In order to reach the long-term goal, countries agreed to set national targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions every 5 years. More than 180 countries have already submitted targets for the first cycle beginning in 2020. Only developed countries are expected to slash their emissions in absolute terms. Developing nations are encouraged to do so as their capabilities evolve over time. Countries agreed to raise $100 billion a year by 2020 to help poor countries adapt their economies and accept a new goal of zero net emissions by later this century. This first universal climate deal will see an accelerated phase-out of fossil fuels, the growth of renewable energy streams, and powerful new carbon markets to enable countries to trade emissions and protect forests. Also in December, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan and India agreed to join hands for the Tapi gas pipeline project, aimed at creating an economically integrated region stretching from the Bay of Bengal to the Caspian Sea. Vice President Hamid Ansari, Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, Presidents of Afghanistan Ashraf Ghani and Turkmenistan Gurbanguly Berdi Mohammedov signed a memorial note and shoveled earth to signify the beginning of the Tapi gas pipeline construction. The 1,814-kilometer Tapi pipeline, named after the countries it is designed to cross, is expected to be operational by 2019 at an estimated cost of up to $10 billion.
2015 also had its share of ugly human tragedies. There were the natural disasters and calamities on one hand, earthquakes and floods and more, and several man-made ones too. Air crashes, chemical explosions, stampedes and more that killed hundreds. Let's take a look back at what we've listed as the worst human tragedies of the year gone by.
A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit Nepal on 25th of April, killing more than 8,000 people and demolishing more than 500,000 homes. Video filmed by an American mountaineer showed the moment the earthquake hit a tea house in the village of Kyanjin Gompa in Langtang National Park. Another amateur video showed the moment mountain climbers at the base camp of Mount Everest in the Himalayas ran for cover as an avalanche triggered by the earthquake approached. Among the capital's landmarks destroyed in the earthquake was the 60-meter-high Dharahara Tower built in 1832 for the Queen of Nepal. Rescue operations getting underway remain slow as teams struggle to make inroads into remote areas of the Himalayan nation cut off by the earthquake. A string of tremors continue to rock Nepal for weeks to come, instilling fear among people eager to return to their homes. Many camped outdoors. The biggest of these aftershocks was felt on the 12th of May, when tremor measuring 7.3 on the Richter scale results in 218 deaths. 153 of these were in Nepal and 62 in India. 442 people were confirmed killed after a cruise ship capsized during a freak tornado in China's Yangtze River on June 1st. Most of the passengers were elderly tourists. This was the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in China's history and the worst since the Taiping sank in 1949, killing over 1,500 people. The cruise ship Dongfang Zijing, as well as other Yangtze River cruise ships, had come under increasing government scrutiny in recent years due to the growing tourist industry in China. The inverted ship was fitted with cables and nets and the holes cut in the hull sealed in order to right the ship and resume the search for survivors or bodies. The search yielded only bodies. The search range was subsequently expanded to 1,000 km downstream. Twin blast on the night of 12th August tore through an industrial area of China's Tianjin, near to a port area where toxic chemicals and gas were stored. More than 160 people died. As a result of the blasts, including at least 21 firefighters, dozens of steel shipping containers were crumpled and rows of cars lined at the port were incinerated. Buildings near the blast site were damaged or destroyed, and the people were evacuated from their homes. 2 days later, a fire reignited among already burned out cars. More than 2,000 pilgrims from around the world died in a crush outside the holy city of Mecca on 24th of September. Saudi Arabia came under heavy criticism for its handling of the disaster. Survivors said chaos ensued when one wave of pilgrims found themselves heading into another group going in another direction, moving towards the stoning of the devil ritual near Mina. Safety during the pilgrimage is a politically sensitive issue for the kingdom's ruling Al Saud dynasty, which presents itself as the guardian of Islam and custodian of its holiest site in Mecca and Medina. On 26th of October, a 7.5 magnitude earthquake with epicenter in the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan struck South Asia. The big one was followed by more than a dozen aftershocks over the next few days. At least 398 people were estimated killed, mostly in Pakistan. Tremors were felt in Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Most parts of North India and even parts of Nepal and China felt the tremors. The northeast monsoon in Chennai, the heaviest in more than 100 years, wreaked unprecedented havoc in November and December. Met Office data says the city recorded over 1,200 millimeters of rain over the 2 months, thrice the normal. It rained nearly 400 millimeters on December 1st. Close to 300 people were killed, besides property and industry worth over 500 crores destroyed. Chennai's airport, railway stations and bus stations were forced shut for days. The city's 2 main rivers, the Adyar and Coombe, overflowed their banks, and tanks in the outskirts overflowed. The Navy and disaster management teams were flown in for rescue and relief work.
And let's switch gears now to the world of sport. Besides the big moments of major tournaments in a plethora of sporting disciplines, there were plenty of thrills and spills on the sidelines too. Here's recounting some of the highlights in the politico sports arena in 2015.
FIFA President Sepp Blatter and UEFA boss Michel Platini have been suspended for 8 years from all football-related activities following an ethics investigation. They were found guilty of breaches surrounding a $2 million disloyal payment made to Platini in 2011. Both men denied any wrongdoing. Blatter, who's been the FIFA boss since 1998, had already announced earlier in 2015 that he was quitting ahead of February's presidential election. Platini was tipped as a future leader of football's world governing body and had hoped to succeed Blatter. After years of waiting, Floyd Mayweather Jr. defeated Manny Pacquiao on May 2nd in Las Vegas in one of the most lucrative and highly anticipated boxing bouts of the century. Mayweather won the contest by a unanimous decision. The long-awaited showdown generated more than 4.4 million pay-per-view buys, nearly doubling the previous record. The welterweight title unification fight also yielded more than $400 million in domestic pay-per-view revenue. Despite the large amount of hype that surrounded it, critics felt that the bout itself was disappointing. The Council of the International Association of Athletics Federations (IAAF) provisionally suspended the All-Russia Athletics Federation (ARAF) from all international events. This after a World Anti-Doping Agency WADA report that alleged state-sponsored doping, pointing out deep maladies in the system. WADA claimed Russia had been guilty of state-sponsored doping on an industrial scale, and that there had been a cover-up at the highest levels of the IAAF, which had effectively sabotaged the London 2012 Olympics. Following the WADA report, Russian President Vladimir Putin promised action against those guilty of abetting a doping program and instructed the sports ministry to conduct its own investigation. The first ever day-night test match under floodlights was played between Australia and New Zealand in Adelaide. A pink ball was used, as different from red for tests and white for day-night ODIs. That's a departure from the tradition of the red leather ball in tests prevalent since the 1870s. Following this successful match, Cricket Australia has scheduled another day-night round of the ongoing Sheffield Shield in mid-February. The Adelaide Test witnessed more than 1 lakh fans in the stadium, a record for a non-Ashes test.
And that's all we have for you on World Panorama today as we look ahead now to 2016. Wishing you all a happy, prosperous, peaceful New Year. I'm Teena Jha signing off. Goodbye.